I think that Welsh people are often overly dramatic in their use of language.
Yeah, well, it's a dramatic tone of speaking as well, you know, and this thing of like, well, this is what comes, I imagine, from having part your own language and then part having to accept its failure to have caught on. So, which is the only way I can...
failure to have caught on.
That's the only way I can describe it. The language has failed to catch on, hasn't it? Well, it has, hasn't it? There's no other way of putting it.
Where do you want it to go? People of Denmark, we don't speak Danish in England, but you don't say, oh, that...
Yeah, but you don't go to Denmark and the signs are printed in Danish and English, and people
they're not
talk...
that polite, are they? In this country, at least we've got the trouble of putting them in English as well.
Okay, are you... Okay, here's the problem. Are you fluent Welsh?
No.
Is Ruth fluent Welsh?
Well, she says no, but I think she's pretty good.
She's not. Well, she's not, and
Right.
she never uses it.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet a Frenchman who isn't fluent in French, right? Just face it, it's a fact, the language hasn't caught on.
The clip you've just seen was from behind the scenes of Gavin and Stacey. I think it was recorded about 10 years ago. In the clip you can see James Corden winding Rob Brydon up about the state of the Welsh language. And as you can also see, when Rob is questioned on the Welsh language, he has no immediate ready answer for James Corden. And sadly, this reflects the attitude of many towards the Welsh language. They see it as a kind of dead language, a language, as James Corden puts it, that hasn't caught on, that English was just more superior, I guess. This couldn't be further from the truth. And the answer to the question of why does most of Wales speak English is kind of complicated and happened over a long time. So in this video, I wanted to discuss why does Wales mostly speak English. Wales is a proud country. We are very proud of our Welsh heritage. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't see the need for Welsh language. In this video, I'm going to discuss some key events that changed the course of the Welsh language and led to the eventual decline of it. This isn't a history lesson, this is simply some points of history which led to the Welsh language declining in some respect. So this is the timeline that we will look at. 1066 to 1282, Norman conquest. 1105, Welsh language is lost in southern Pembrokeshire. 1536, Acts of Union. 1800-ish, Welsh not is introduced in schools. 1847, the treachery of the Blue Books. 1865, Adva is established. 1940, last known use of the Welsh not. 1962, 1981, Welsh language lowest ever recorded use. 1993, Welsh is given equal status to English. Modern day. On October 14th, 1066, William the Bastard conquered England and became William the Conqueror. William did not originally have any intention of conquering Wales, as he came to claim his birthright, the English throne. The conquest of Wales was a slow one and had different motivations. The conquest was more of a slow creep into Wales, as Wales was divided into many kingdoms, with many kings and princes to overthrow, unlike England, which only had one king to conquer. The incursions happened by William creating earldoms in the border regions of Wales, at Chester, Shrewsbury and Hereford. He granted these earls all the power of any land they conquered, essentially making them almost like kings in their own right. The conquest was a slow push westward, and eventually, for most of the Norman conquest period, they controlled these lands, all the border regions and much of South Wales, Gower Peninsula and southern Pembrokeshire. Around 1095, a wave of Flemish weavers was sent to Wales from England and given lands in southern Pembrokeshire. By 1105, the Welsh language was lost in southern Pembrokeshire, and the Flemish Norman dialects became dominant. In 1113 and 1155, more Flemish settlers were sent to the area, and as Flemish language was very closely related to Anglo-Saxon, it accounts for the English-sounding place names in the area. These divisions can still be seen today, in many forms: place names, castle builds, and even more recently in 2015, it was discovered that the southern and northern Pembrokeshire people remain genetically different. The Norman dominance in southern Pembrokeshire gives us our first evidence of the loss of Welsh language in Wales. Over the next 400 years, Welsh would remain the dominant language of much of Wales, as French Norman was used mostly only by upper class nobility and the Welsh language was still the language of the people. The same would remain in England, where Norman French was the language of the nobles and Anglo-Saxon English was the language of the common people. One key difference is, though, that French had a much bigger impact on the English language than it did on the Welsh language, with as much as 29% of the English language being French-based today. The First Act of Union was passed in 1536, and the Norman March was divided into 7 counties, therefore ending the distinction between the Principality of Wales and the English Marches. The law of England was to be the only law of Wales, and to administer it, justices of the peace were appointed to every county. Wales was to be represented in Parliament by 26 members, who were all English nobles. There were about 7,500 words in the 1536 Act, of which 150 deal with the Welsh language. This 2% of the statute has become a subject of more comment than the rest of the legislation. It stated that English was to be the only language of the courts of Wales, and those using the Welsh language were not to receive public office in the territories of the King of England. Outside of southern Pembrokeshire, southern Gower, and parts of the Vale of Glamorgan, and some areas along the border, the mass of the population had Welsh as their only language. It proved impossible to exclude Welsh from the courts, and interpreters were used on a considerable scale. It is unlikely that the English authorities sought extinction of the Welsh language directly, and instead wanted uniform administration, and implicit in that was the creation of a Welsh ruling class fluent in English. In 1536, significant numbers of the Welsh gentry already spoke English. The proportion rose rapidly thereafter, and over the next 200 years, Welsh became confined to the working and lower middle classes, a central development in the public attitude towards the language. Whether or not the English at the time intentionally wanted to destroy the language, they contributed massively. Imagine being taken to court for something, only to get there and you as a Welsh speaker cannot understand a word of what's going on, and then suddenly you are being taken away in chains and sent to prison, none the wiser of anything that just happened. The Welsh Knot is perhaps the most cruel of all initiatives created to prevent the use of the Welsh language. It's not exactly clear when the Welsh Knot first came into use, with some sources stating that it possibly has its roots going back to the Second Act of Union in 1707, but we do know for sure that it was being used ritually in schools by 1852. The Welsh Knot was a simple piece of wood, with the letters WN carved into it. It was created to shame Welsh-speaking children. Any child caught speaking Welsh in school was made to wear the Welsh Knot for the rest of the day and then punished at the end of the day, possibly by cane. The Welsh Knot is particularly cruel because it targeted children. Humiliating a child in any way will stay with them for the entirety of their lives, leaving lasting mental scars. This simple piece of wood had a most devastating impact on the Welsh language, reducing the amount of Welsh speakers by possibly as much as 50% as these maps show. In 100 years, a simple piece of wood did more damage to the Welsh language than any wars did. In 1846, William Williams, ironically a Welshman from Llanpimsaint, made a speech in the House of Commons and established a commission to conduct an inquiry into the state of education in Wales. The government at this time was concerned with law and order, following the Chartist uprising and the Rebecca riots. The authors of these books were three English barristers, Lingon, Symonds and Johnson. They understood no Welsh and had little knowledge of Welsh life. Bearing in mind at this time the majority of people in Wales were monoglot Welsh speakers, not understanding a word of English. These men were also men of the Church of England, and Welsh people were nonconformists. The commissioners published three books, 1,252 pages, damning the state of Welsh education. The report indicated that many adults could not write, many common children did not attend school at all, and the few children that did go to school only attended Sunday school. The report condemned many schools and teachers that weren't teaching English as a second language. Possibly the worst factor of this whole endeavour was that where the commissioners weren't able to find interpreters, they took the evidence of Anglican churchgoers, who were a vast minority in Wales. The report claimed that the Welsh people were dirty, lazy, drunk and immoral, and they blamed two factors for this: the Welsh chapel and the Welsh language. The report went as far as to suggest the young Welsh people only attended chapel as an excuse to participate in immoral acts. The Blue Books sparked protest in Wales. People were incensed that Welsh women had been maligned, and many leapt to their defence. Many of the leaders of Wales at this time were sensitive to criticism and did their best to demonstrate that Welsh people were honest, moral and respectable. The Blue Books had a lasting damaging effect on the mentality of the Welsh people. From then on, English became the language of education in Wales, and Welsh became largely confined to home and the chapel. As a consequence of the Welsh Not and the Blue Books, many people became concerned with the state of the Welsh language and feared for its future. This sparked Reverend Michael D. Jones, a nonconformist preacher from Bala, to look westward and suggest the idea of a Welsh-speaking community in the Americas. He looked at many countries and chose Argentina, as it was outside of the sphere of influence of the English language. Michael D. Jones had been corresponding with the Argentinian government about settling the area known as Bahia Blanca, where Welsh immigrants could preserve their Welsh language and culture. The Argentinian government granted the request as it put them firmly in control of a large tract of land disputed with Chile. In 1865, 153 Welsh settlers left Wales and established a colony in the Chubut province of Argentina. Since its formation, the settlement has had mixed successes, having to compete within the harsh environment with local natives and the Spanish language. Today, thankfully, Welsh is still spoken in some areas of Argentina, and it's estimated around about 5,000 people speak Welsh in Argentina as a first language, with roughly 50,000 people of Welsh descent. It's unclear whether or not the people leaving Wales and settling in Argentina has preserved or endangered the language more. But if we imagine a scenario where the Welsh language survives in Argentina, in the future this might become a separate Celtic language of its own. It's already recognised as a separate dialect. If we look at this table from Wikipedia, we can see Patagonian Welsh is a mix of North and South Welsh with some Spanish influence. In 1981 was the year that the Welsh language reached an all-time low. There were as little as 500,000 speakers of Welsh at any degree in Wales. Despite what people like to believe or say, the Welsh language does not look to be dying out. In 1981, there were a little over 500,000 speakers of Welsh. In the 2011 census, the number of Welsh speakers was recorded at 562,000. At the time of recording this, the 2021 census results are still pending. But the annual population survey by the ONS estimated that for the year ending in September 2020, 872,000 people, or 28% of the population of Wales, aged 3 or over, were able to speak the language, implying a possible increase in the prevalence of the Welsh language since the 2011 census. Similarly, the National Survey for Wales conducted by the Welsh Government has also tended to have a higher percentage of Welsh speakers than the census, with the most recent results for 2018 to 2019 suggesting that 22% of the population were able to speak Welsh, with an additional 16% noting that they had some Welsh speaking ability, totaling 38%. Since the Welsh language got equal status in 1993, it has seen a steady increase in speakers and popularity. I think, as we've discussed in this video, the events of the Act of Union, the Welsh Not, the Blue Books, y Wladfa, all these things over time have contributed to the negative mentality that some older generations of Welsh people have towards the Welsh language. And myself, it may look like the Welsh language is dying out. The numbers clearly do not suggest this. But what I do see happening over the course of time is, as the need to work and live in bigger, more populated urban centres arises, I see the Welsh language leaving the Welsh heartlands and becoming more diversified across the whole of Wales rather than being stuck to one place of Wales. And hopefully Welsh language can be a language that is still used in the future.